All right. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about the pyramids, right? So now much mystery and sensationalism surrounds the pyramids of Egypt about, well, how old they are, right? And who built them and their purpose, right? For instance, the Pyramid of Giza. It was considered one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, with this great pyramid, the largest, the tallest, I should say, structure in the world until I think the Lincoln Cathedral was completed in 1311. So it rises 481 feet in the sky. Of course, with any mystery, right? Many are anxious to fill in that void, maybe a little bit too anxious, with various people advocating everything from these structures being built by ancient aliens or with their advice, or to being used for storing grain. So what were they? Well, as you know, um, I will explain the exact history. I mean, the exact history as we know it concerning the development of these magnificent structures and their ages and their builders and their meaning. As a trained historian, as well as an archaeologist, as well as a scholar of religion, my PhD is in all three areas. I will make sure you will leave this talk with enough information to satisfy all your inquiries and maybe, hopefully, help you create new questions in their place. So as back as far as 1842, that's not that far, but a certain Carl Richard Lepsius counted approximately 67 pyramids in Egypt. But many more have been discovered since then. So right now we have found around 118. So often we focus upon the pyramids along the Giza Plateau, but the reality is there are pyramids all over Egypt. But, however, um, there's a few things I want to bring up, with the notable exception of the third dynasty pyramid known as Zwawit el Amwat. All of these pyramids, every one, is located on the western bank of the Nile. So there's no denial about that. Well, there is a lot of denial, but typically these pyramids are grouped together in what are called pyramid fields. So there you have it, right? So let's kind of go. So what are we going into? Evolution of the pyramids. So pyramids didn't just appear, autochtonically out of nowhere, and suddenly they're building pyramids. We can trace the gradual evolution of pyramids over a period of time. So let's go all the way back to the early dynastic period, which is 3050 to 2686 BCE. That's 3050, right? 2686 BCE. So we're kind of going back quite a ways, So, just about 5,000 years ago, right? That's a little ways away, right? And so, and we're going to go through to the first part of the Old Kingdom a little bit, where they built what are known as mastabas, or sorry, I should say mastabas. Mastabas. So, what is a mastaba? So it's spelled Mastabas. Mastaba. Well, mastaba basically is a rectangular shaped structure. It has a flat roof and it has sloping sides on the exterior. And it is used for the sole purpose of burial. Now, they didn't call them mastabas in ancient Egypt. In fact, the word mastaba is Arabic, and it means bench of mud. A bench of mud. So because so many of them were made out of mud bricks, although the later ones were made out of stone too. But so when the Arabs encountered these mastabas, they just said, "This looks like a bench of mud." They've obviously deteriorated over a period of time when they're making this observation. But the ancient Egyptians didn't call them mastabas. They called them prit-digit. Prit-digit basically means eternal house. It also can be translated as house of eternity. And so these were tombs. Now, the Egyptians, they believed, like many other cultures around the world, the soul needed to be ritually fed. The soul, of course, a combination between ideas known as the ka and the ba. The ka, it sounds like I'm gasping, providing the breath, right? And the ba, which is the personality. Anyway, so these need to be fed, these parts. So each mastaba had a doorway that led to a chapel, accommodating a place for various offerings of food and drink to be either left or burned to feed the soul, to keep it alive, to keep it strong. So it really was, in many cases, a false door within this chapel. The bodies were and typically located below. In fact, in a cavernous realm, a subterranean kind of chamber that was sealed closed, so you can't have access to it. That's why there's a false wall there, right? And here, within this chamber, they had a representation of the deceased, who was oftentimes hidden within the masonry, for its protection. So you had this. So usually, there was this chamber reserved for the body, and there's a second one that's reserved for their stuff that go along with them in the afterlife. And this is their personal, precious items, and maybe wheat and other kinds of food were stored there. Of course, a lot of beer, right? So anyway, but the special chamber, burial chamber, it's called the serdab, and high up the walls of the serdab were small little openings that allowed the ka and the ba to leave the realm of the physical body and to go out. So, but it also allowed for this aspect of the soul to return to the body, because it is believed that the body needed to be contained, needed to be preserved as a receptacle for the souls. In fact, some of the ancient Egyptians believed that the ba and ka had to return to the body or it would die. Again, these openings were not meant to see the statue, because once again, sometimes it's really hemmed in the way with all the masonry, but it is to allow the fragrance of the burning incense and to be floating in to this particular burial chamber, as well as, of course, rituals to be spoken, to be heard by the deceased or by their soul. That's very fascinating. So, in general, the mastaba were 4 times longer than their width. They could be as tall as 30 feet in height, sometimes a little taller. And in direction, they're usually a north-south orientation. And what are they used for? This is important. The focus upon it is not only for the preservation of the body, right? It is for the purpose of the resurrection of the body within the tomb. Got it? Resurrection of the body within the tomb. So you could see that this idea of the mastaba will eventually be transferred over to the pyramids. And the primary reason is connected to burial. And you're going to see that. I'm going to give you all the evidence, and you'll see it for yourself. Okay. So by the time we get to the first dynasty, right? The mastaba started to get a little bit larger. So in many ways, it simulated a house plan, had several rooms and a central one that contained the sarcophagus. There was abundant funerary offerings, and of course, what will happen is that it becomes just like a house of the dead, a house of the deceased. Now, typically of the second as well as the third dynasty, mastabas became known as the stairway mastaba, another development. So the tomb chamber then became deeper than it ever has before and was connected to the top with an inclined shaft and stairs. Eventually, a second and a third level were added to the mastaba, and this process would gradually evolve into what is known as the stepped pyramid. But we're not there yet. So when the pharaoh by the name of Horaha, I love that name, Horaha. Horaha. Anyway, the son of Narmer, who is oftentimes as identified as Menes, right, the early unifier of Egypt. It was a means to an end. So, uh, anyway, when Pharaoh Horaha was buried within a vast complex of the Acropolis of Abydos, many members of the royal household had to be buried with him. This included servants, many women. I don't know why, but they included dwarves, even some dogs. It was believed that it was needed. Their company was needed to accompany them to their journey into the afterlife. Now, we are uncertain at this point whether these servants and selected dwarves committed mass suicide or they were simply killed outright for the occasion of this ritual burial. Hor-Aha's body was buried directly alongside young lions, which is, of course, the symbol of royalty. Well, so this became a tradition. It's an interesting tradition. And so, the idea is that when Pharaoh got old and he died, those who were his staff, I guess when they signed on, they signed on not only for this life, they signed on for the next life. So in life, in death, they must have signed away on a nice document there to agree to, in a sense, have their soul carried to eternity with their pharaoh, whom they serve. So what will happen is that there became a tradition. The tradition is that when Pharaoh dies, the staff gets to go with them. And I'm going to give you the exact tabulations right now. So when we go after Hor-Aha, we get to Didger. So Didger, he was buried with 318 servants. Wow. Digit, who followed him, was buried with 174 servants that we know for a fact that were sacrificed and then buried with him. After him was a pharaoh by the name of Ben, and the forensic evidence proves that the 136 men and women died all at the same time, and they were strangled to death, as we note upon their necks, right, the bones being crunched in those areas. And yet, when we get to the time of Adjib, he was buried with 64 attendants, ritually killed to attend him in the afterlife. You guys notice something about these numbers. You have 318, 174, 136, 64. Yeah, you're right. The numbers are going down. I think people are starting to learn their lesson when, Pharaoh starts to get sick and they think he's going to go. They're thinking about transferring to another job. So, I'm not sure if I'm in for this whole life thing, afterlife thing. So we're going to look to work for somebody else. So the numbers are starting to go down. Yet it is clear that the numbers of servants ritually killed and buried with the pharaoh as I said, we're deceased in number. And then what happens is as follows. With Semerkert, who ruled around 2920 BCE, we find 67 additional tombs were built for his servants, but it looks like that these were built after he died. After he died, in some cases, many years later. So possibly what happened in this case is that, well, Pharaoh dies, and they, as opposed to saying you can go along with them and close that big door, boom, and then start panicking. What will happen is that you have another option. You can live out the rest of your life, and then when you die, then at that point you can be buried with Pharaoh. And so that was the idea. But of course, there still was a few throwbacks. There's a few pharaohs where they went back to the old style. But in many cases, what they did is they replaced these servants with something else. And that's what's called the Eushabatus figure, or the Shabbati funerary figure. And so these little figures, actually at first are large, were intended to ritually replace those who typically would attend Pharaoh to the afterlife and serve him in the afterlife. Now, as opposed to having them, they're going to be replaced by these little statuettes. So to substitute. So what will happen is, what are these statuettes supposed to do? Well, okay. So what these statuettes are supposed to do is as follows. Yeah, this is the real one. This is a Shabbos figure. Like, oh, yay, hi. What these figures do. Basically, the word Shabbati or Shabbatis means answerer. It means an answerer. And so the idea is they're always ready to perform whatever menial and manual tasks that are asked upon them, because they are simply answering to whatever Pharaoh wants in the afterlife. So I guess apparently when Pharaoh dies and you have the opening of the mouth ceremony, and his Ha and Ah are reunited, becoming the Ak, what will happen is an essence possibly of that spirit entered into these little figures, and they come alive, and they will answer you. They'll answer Pharaoh, become animated and move around. At first, these figures had life-sized heads made out of limestone, right? But eventually, they became smaller in size, travel size. See, this one's travel size. And you can see that they're usually shaped like a mummy. I don't know whose mummy it would be, not my mummy, but shaped like a mummy, often with a headdress, and sometimes carrying a basket on their backs or a hoe. You can see back here that there's nothing here, but somebody scratched whatever was written off of it. So it's been scratched off. So it intentionally scratched. So somebody just chiseled it away. So they are, the figurines appear very early, as I mentioned before, but the term itself is not applied until we get to the Middle Kingdom. And so the idea is that they are empowered to work for the Pharaoh, as well as others, eventually, other nobles, in the afterlife. They're going to do everything. They're going to clean your toiletries. They're going to do your makeup. They're going to tend your farm, because they're going to weave your baskets. They're going to do everything for you. I got to tell you, just between you and me, this shop with this figure has not done anything for me. It hasn't cleaned my house. Look, I got a mess back there, but it hasn't done any work. So I don't know. Maybe I can get a money back guarantee. Oh wait, no, I guess I have to be dead first, right? Yeah, that's a little much to ask. So I think I'll stop there. So what will happen is there's a few texts that talk about this too. For example, the Shabbatis is mentioned in the New Kingdom as the name, using the name, in the Book of the Dead. And I'll read one part from it. It says, Uh, Shabbat figure, if the Osiris, placed name of the deceased, be decreed to do any of the work which is to be done in Kurt Netter, let everything which standeth in the way be removed from him, whether it be to plow the fields, or to fill the channels with water, or to carry sand from the east to the west. The Shabbat figure replied, I will do it. Verily, I am here when thou callest. So he hasn't said anything yet. So I'm waiting. We'll see. He'll get an answer eventually. So we move on to the next pharaoh. His name is Den. Den ruled around 2930 BCE, roughly. He was considered one of the greatest pharaohs of the early dynastic period, and is the first to be shown wearing the double crown, one red and one white, representing Lower and Upper Egypt. Den was interred within a tomb that's known as Tomb T in the area of Abydos, which was, of course, associated with other first dynastic kings. Tomb T is amongst the largest and most finely built of the tombs in the area, and is the first. So Den's is the first to feature a staircase and a floor that's both made of granite. He was the first. His tomb was the first tomb to have a flight of stairs leading up to it. Those of the earlier kings being filled directly above from the roofs. Right. It is possible the tomb may have been used as a storehouse beforehand. This tomb includes architectural elements made of stone rather than mud bricks. So we do have a change of medium during this time. We take a look at this, and there's, of course, there is 20 labels that were found made of ivory and ebony were found in this tomb. Tomb T is surrounded by burial sites of 136 men and women who are buried at the same time as the king. Now, it looks like for a short period of time, they kind of went back to the old practice, just for a short period of time that goes back again, of human sacrifice, because there is evidence of strangulation upon them. But then again, the Shabbat figures will take over. Again, they're larger at first, but then they get smaller. Den was really connected to a particular goddess. I just think this is interesting. I'll just bring it up. Her name is Sishat, or also known as Sesat. Sesat images were set up to her in different places, but around the tomb. Sesat was the ancient goddess, the Egyptian goddess, believe it or not, of wisdom, of knowledge, and writing, with her name meaning she who is the scribe. In fact, she was also oftentimes credited with inventing writing. That's right. She's really popular during the Old Kingdom. Sishat is oftentimes shown as the official scribe of the Egyptian pantheon, scribbling out various details, recording everything that's going on. In fact, she was the goddess who recorded anything and everything needs to be written down. So she's the goddess of history and building and astronomy and surveying and architecture and mathematics and astrology and anything intellectual. She wrote it down. I love one of her names. She's known as the mistress of the house of books, with her priests overseeing the sacred archives and libraries of various kinds dedicated to her. Sisat was always depicted as a woman in human form, and sometimes portrayed with a 7-pointed emblem above her head. Now, we don't know exactly what that means, but, and what she does is that she also is shown to record the passage of time. And what will happen is that you're going to see that she's holding a palm stem. And the palm stem is marked up with notches. And these notches, of course, represent the passage of time. And so the various pharaohs, this is why she's represented in tombs at this time, the various pharaohs know that their time is going to be up because she's the one who measures their reign. So they worship her because they want to have a nice long reign because she decides their fate. Isn't it interesting? And yet we hardly ever hear about her, but she's depicted in the earlier tombs. And I said earlier tombs because gradually she starts to get less and less as we move into the Middle Kingdom, unfortunately. And so that's just the reality. And so what will happen is patriarchy starts to move in, and many of her her jobs, her duties are transferred over to the moon god Thoth. And then all of a sudden, sometimes she either becomes Thoth's wife or Thoth's daughter. So again, it's clearly a change. But during this early period of time, during the Old Kingdom, she is the goddess of wisdom of the Egyptians. Okay, so we move on to the founder of the second dynasty of Egypt. His name is Hotep Sekmenwai, or we, who ruled between 25 to 29 years, around 2750. The name means two powers are reconciled, suggesting if there's two powers that are being reconciled, it looks like there was some kind of conflict between Upper and Lower Egypt, and also between the god Horus and Set. Upper Egypt is connected with Horus, and Lower Egypt connected with Set. So there you have it. Now, what we'll see is that now we'll see more images, of course, of Horus during this time. And then around 2740, the second king of the second dynasty was named Ra-Neb. Ra-Neb. And we know from his honorary name that he is represented by the hieroglyph of the sun. So perhaps that's the Ra aspect. Of course, the name can be translated two different ways. It could either mean Ra is my Lord, or it can mean, well, Lord of the Sun. But we don't know the context. But if it does mean Ra, this is one of the earliest references to Ra. I know we think about the Egyptians, and it's Ra, Ra this, Ra, Ra that. What's all the Ra about? But the reality is that Ra was not at first the most important deity. That was Horus, and that was Seth or Set, and of course some of the other ones that mentioned. But eventually, he's going to rise, and that will mean that the sun cult will also start to rise. The sun also rises, right? Why is that important? Because the sun cult will connect later on to the pyramids. So this is where ideas start to connect. So there you have it. So moving right along, we still have to wait until Dozer, which we'll talk about soon, until the sun cult becomes really connected to Ra in a more correct sense. And I think we probably need to get there pretty quick. So let's go there. King Dozer. Whenever I hear the word King Dozer, I think about this. Sounds like he's falling asleep, Hi, I'm King. Oh man, he's King Dozer. He just dozed off. Okay, King Dozer. He ruled around 2686. He was the founder of the third dynasty, and importantly, he was the pharaoh who established what is called the Old Kingdom, which stretched from 2686 to 2181. Okay, the King Dozer is the one who's the next, who really starts to establish the pyramid. And we're going to tell you exactly how that happened. What? Yeah, why not? Let's go here. So what happened is that those are, well, I shouldn't say that he's the one who did it. We just happen to know the name of the architect who made the first pyramid. His name is Imhotep. Imhotep. And he's the one who designed this. And but at first, it was not intended to be a pyramid at all. But some reason it did. So what happened is that they built a mastaba. A big old huge mastaba. You know what mastaba is now, right? Has the sloping sides, the flat table-like top. But for some reason, Imhotep decided to put a second mastaba on top of the first one. And then he decided to put a third one on top of the next one. And then he decided to put a fourth mastaba on top of that one, and a fifth mastaba on top of that one, on top of all the rest, creating a stair-step pyramid shape, but steps, step pyramid. So basically, the first pyramid, which is not the true pyramid shape yet, is basically one mastaba on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. That's all it is. Step by step, I told you. Oh, bad joke. There you have it. Isn't that fascinating? See, we're watching the evolution. It's gradual. We have a guy's name. You know? Now, the area directly below the step pyramid was a maze of corridors, pretty amazing, with one shaft going down 28 meters from the surface directly down to Dozer's tomb that was sealed with this plug that weighed 3.5 tons. Of course, such a pyramid was monumental, and it was made out of stone as opposed to mud brick. But apparently, Dozer had secured enough resources and human power to be able to put this all together. Now, let's talk about Imhotep, because we know a lot about this architect, and he becomes legendary. He was both supposedly the chancellor to King Dozer, as well as the high priest of, yes, here we go, of Ra, who is the sun god of Heliopolis. Beyond that, Hotep was one of the earliest known architects and one of the earliest known engineers. Now, the Egyptian historian by the name of Manetho, yes, gave Imhotep the credit for the invention of the stone-dressed building. But of course, he really wasn't the first architect to do that, but he's given credit for it. Now, there are two inscriptions contemporary to Imhotep about Imhotep. So before we say this is something that happens way later on, it's revisionism, we do have inscriptions from that time connected to Imhotep. One was located on the pedestal of one of Dozer's statues, and the other was actually some graffiti upon the enclosure wall surrounding Sekhmet's unfinished step pyramid, who is the next king after Dozer, which means that Imhotep kept living longer even after Dozer had died. So there you have it. Now, according to the famous Egyptologist by the name of James Henry Breasted, who lived from 1865 to 1935, Imhotep was portrayed as a priest with a shaven head, seated and holding a papyrus roll. Occasionally, he was shown clothed in the archaic costume of a priest. The details of his life, very little has survived, he says, though numerous statues and statuettes of him have been found. Some show him as an ordinary man who is dressed in plain attire. Others show him as a sage who is seated on a chair with a roll of papyrus on his knees or under his arms. Later, his statuettes show him with a god-like beard, standing and carrying the Ankh scepter. He is represented seated with a papyrus scroll across his knees, wearing a skull cap and a long linen kilt. He can interpret the papyrus as suggested in the source as the house of life. So in fact, later on, he in hope that becomes divine. Yeah, he believed to be a god of some kind to be able to do that, and sometimes or a semi divine. One story says that he was the son of Thoth, and sometimes he was connected to other goddesses or goddesses as well. So divine. So there you have it. Okay, Imhotep also became very important when it comes to Egyptian medicine. claimed to be the author of various medical treatises. We have a surviving text known as the Edward Smith Papyrus, which is attributed to Imhotep, and is very pragmatic in its focus. In fact, you go through it, and I'm really surprised because this medical text is not too much into magical cures. It's actually about more direct cures. The manuscript dates from 1700 BCE, so it is quite old, and it may go back way earlier, some scholars have said. And it goes into various medical treatments. 48 medical cases are described here, 27 for head injuries, 6 for throat and neck injuries, 2 injuries to the clavicle. There's also, those for injuries to the arms and the sternum and so forth, tumor abscesses, breast tumors as well. And so he's amazing. So there you have it, a very famous architect. So he's not just well known. I mean, he's known throughout the centuries, this great architect who is connected with the earliest pyramid. But what does the pyramid represent at the time of the Old Kingdom? Now, the answer to this question is one of gradual progression of meaning as time passes, with different beliefs connected with these structures dependent upon who was viewing them at the time. From the archaeological evidence, the evolution appears to start with the mastaba tombs becoming more and more grandiose, and then a decision by Dozer to make his final resting place even more magnificent by placing a series of mastabas one on top of the other, thereby creating the step pyramid. We know that the shape of the pyramid came to represent the descending rays of the sun. But this concept would not be relevant with a step pyramid, but only with more of the true pyramid shape, which, of course, is covered with this highly reflective limestone. We know that the pyramids were believed to represent the primordial mound. Of course, from this primordial mound, the entire universe emerged. In fact, the pyramid texts from the late 5th dynasty and in the 6th dynasty elaborate upon this myth, the myth of the primordial mound. But the question must be asked if this is relevant going all the way back to the beginning of the 3rd dynasty. We do not know if this belief goes that far back. We know that the shape of the pyramid came to represent the descending rays, as I said, but here we go. The rays. Let's go into these theories. I think I'm going to jump into it. Let's talk about this. So, what will happen is this: the Egyptian sun god Ra was considered the father of all the pharaohs, and he was said to have created himself from a pyramid-shaped mound of earth before creating all other gods. I'll say that one more time. The Egyptian sun god Ra, considered the father of all the pharaohs, was said to have created himself. He's creating himself from a pyramid-shaped mound of earth before he creates all the other gods. That seems to be important, right? So that's why we have this connection with the rays of Ra. Does that make sense? Right? But what we can't be sure about at first, even before the extra layers of mythology and other interpretations are added to the pyramids, was the association with the dead. Yes, with the dead, with real tombs in them. And they were intentionally designed to house the remains of the pharaohs and members of his household. So we know that much. In fact, they were all constructed, as I said, on the west side of the Nile, which of course is associated with the realm of death and the afterlife, for it was the place of the setting sun. So what are they? Well, maybe calling them resurrection machines, maybe taking this a little bit too far. The evidence does seem to support that the very first mastaba and then the pyramids were connected with resurrection from the very beginning. You saw that with the mastabas. Furthermore, many Egyptologists, Marek Lerner, for example, articulate that the ancient Egyptian word for pyramid translates as resurrection. Wait a minute, what? Wait, stop. Dr. Riesel, stop, wait. You mean there's another word for a pyramid? Yeah. Oh, because I talked to some people and they can't find the pyramid, being used by the Egyptians. And so we think maybe they're formed by others. Well, you're looking for the wrong word. Pyramid is a shape. It's a shape. It's a pyramid shape. And pyramidus, right? And it's Greek, so the Greeks later on looked, hey, look at that. That's the shape of that's a pyramid. Okay, so call the pyramid. There's also, I always think to myself that the ancient Greeks, when they arrived, they were kind of looking around. We have them from the 6th and 5th, 4th centuries. There was at this time a popular pastry called a pyramidus. It's a pyramid shape. So I'm wondering, they're looking at these pyramids and they're thinking, looks like a giant pastry. But the point of the matter is that, I guess you want me to give you the word, don't you? You don't hold me back. There's another wordy English translation that they're called, basically in the shadow of a long past, patiently awaiting the future. But here it is. I'm going to go ahead and tell you. Myrrh. That's right. Myrrh. So using our lettering system, M-E-R, myrrh. That's what they're called, myrrhs. Oh, there we go. So you can go around and correct everybody. Pyramids, what are you talking about? We're going with the ancient myrrhs. So wait, so if you're a lady that's attending an ancient pyramid, does that make you a mermaid? Okay, stopping. So moving right along. So myrrh, it is. So not much is known. So now you're getting too much information already. Go, wow, a lot of my questions are being answered right now. I know, isn't that great? Now, not much is known about Dozer's successors, but Semeket, around 2650 BCE, he also left his own step pyramid at Saqqara. So the step pyramid things seems to be the new fact. Everybody wants to make their mastabas bigger than the others. That's just the way people are. You kind of wonder. It's almost like the mentality that you have in the New York skyline when it comes to skyscrapers. It's like, we'll just make them taller and bigger. So, the early ones, mastabas are small. And it's like the next pharaoh goes, well, I'll make my mastaba bigger. And it gets bigger and bigger. And they go, well, and of course, Dozer comes along, let's stack them up and make it even bigger. Look at me, I'm magnificent. Freud would have a field day with this one. But then, of course, now each one's kind of getting bigger, and we're just keeping in step with the times and stopping now. So his pyramid, though, Semaket's pyramid, was planned as a step pyramid from the beginning on, though. So while Dozer's pyramid was at first a mastaba, and they built one each on top, this time it's like we're intentionally making it step from the beginning. So it has less of the curvatures of mastaba, and it's more strictly based on the idea that this is a step, a stairway to heaven, so to speak. There you have it, right? But the pyramid was not completed. It would have had 6 or 7 steps, but like Dozer's, it was built of limestone bricks. But unfortunately, this pyramid remained unfinished, possibly because of the pharaoh's sudden death. And so only most of the first step was finished, and the rest wasn't. But looking at the base, it was supposed to be bigger and taller and stronger. But oh well. Now we can't identify the pyramid of the shadowy Sonnekat. But as for the next pharaoh after him, Kaba, which is 2640 BCE, I'm going through each pharaoh at a time because I want you to know exactly how the pyramids come about. And you're knowing, and by doing this, you will learn how it evolves. And of course, the mythology evolving with it. So what happens here is Kabak, 2640 BC, he is connected with the unfinished layer pyramid, which is located about 2 kilometers of Giza in a place known as Zawit Eras. And we can see from his Serik, his royal crest honoring the name of Pharaoh, right? That once again, you have he's connected to this, but well, actually, I should say he's connected to it from these bowls that were discovered nearby, and by association, they say that this is his. Some people say, well, it could be some other one, but who knows? And the next step in the evolution of the pyramid occurred under the pharaoh Huni. Here we go, Huni, 2610 BCE. Now we're entering into some very interesting territory. Now he is associated, accordingly, to the very odd pyramid at Needham by some Egyptologists. They basically investigated this pyramid, and they have determined that it was originally a stepped pyramid. But in fact, most of it was built before they decided to modify it to have even more steps above it, because Huni wanted his pyramid even taller. So this made the monument appear more, because the smaller steps made it look more pyramidal in shape. So as opposed to the big thick steps, now we're getting like little steps, right? And so it's looking more like a pyramid shape. After his death, Huni seemed to have enjoyed a long-lasting mortuary cult, as we know. And then, of course, we move on to the next pharaoh. And his name is Sneferu. I always like talking about Sneferu. I always picture, this is me, up there with Dozer sleeping. Sneferu, I always picture Sneferu having this real, pharaonic, emblem on the head dress, but the big nose, My name is Sneferu. Anyway, let's see the cartoon character. All right. So Sneferu ascended the throne, and he decided to cover the monument that was built by Huni with polished limestone blocks, and so create the very first true pyramid. Okay. So although some Egyptologists said that Sneferu built the entire pyramid. So you got this contest. So some people say that Huni, what he did is he made the step pyramid with lots of little steps to make it taller, and then later on, Sneferu came and put the limestone blocks to make the true pyramid. But others say that no. Sneferu made the little steps, and then he put the limestone blocks over it, and he did this all as part of the construction strategy. So there's kind of a fight between the two, So, but they're in camps. But either way, we have the Sneferu, the true pyramid shape, exactly when that happens. And so that's 2600 BCE, 2600 is when we finally get the true pyramid. But you know what happens? Ugh, I got to tell you this story. Of course, he wants to, some people say it's for him. Some people say that, no, that's for Huni, whatever. But the point is, he tries to make a bigger pyramid. And so you have what is called the bent pyramid. Okay, so how it turns out is that the bent pyramid is fascinating. So he builds this enormous pyramid, and it rises from the desert at a 54-degree inclination. 54-degree inclination. But suddenly, it proceeds to a shallower angle of 43 degrees towards the very top, making the pyramid literally bent. So it goes like this, And then somebody goes, like, what happened? What happened is that the engineers realized that the angle was way too steep. They messed, and so they tried to fix it. So this is not. So this is a work in progress. This is a failed pyramid. It's bent, and so there you have it. So once again, I want you to memorize that though. So it went from 54 degrees and then bends to 43 degrees, because you're going to hear about that again. Well, what will happen is, let's talk about the Meidum pyramid. The Meidum pyramid, which we just talked about, that's controversial. What happened here is as follows. I mentioned to you the little steps, and then he put the limestone block. So why did he stick with that one? Because as it turned out, is that these limestone blocks that were facing this the Meidum pyramid slid down. Where those blocks lay to this day. Well, not all of them. I mean, because people took a lot of it, but there's still debris from it collapsing. You can see this. So it's like, oh. So it's like the unveiling. It fell apart. So that doesn't work either. So first time, or maybe the second time you get the Bed pyramid. The second time or the first time, you get this little step pyramid, and it slides down. By the way, he tries a third time, and he's thinking, wait a second, Dr. Riefeld, Snefru is making 3 pyramids? Yeah, during his reign. Yeah, that's a lot of pyramids. I know. He's trying to get it right. So third is the charm. Yay, Snefru. Yes, thank you, Snefru. So Snefru, he tries a third time, and that's called the Red Pyramid. And so what does he do? He makes the entire Red Pyramid 43 degrees at the inclination. Because he learned from the earlier pyramid, right? The earlier pyramid, of course, was at a 54 degree. Changed. So what happened is they changed the degrees, and there's a consistency there. And what happens as a result is the Red Pyramid still stands to this day. So with that, so now you have a true pyramid that stands. It's called the Red Pyramid, and it is huge. It is enormous. So what happens is that, in fact, it is the third largest pyramid in Egypt, second only to the pyramids of Khufu and Khafra and Giza. So he learned the lessons of the Bet pyramid, with the upper section of the Bet pyramid modified, right, to a 43-degree angle from a 54-degree angle on top. And so he learned that lesson and made it consistent all the way through. We take a look at this pyramid, and it is enormous. I'm serious. It stands 105 meters or 344 feet high today. So it is, again, the third largest in Egypt. So when people are always arguing about the largest one, the great one of Khufu, also known as Cheops, right? The Great Pyramid of Giza. They're going, how was he able to do that during his reign? Look at Snefru. I gotta tell you, he made 3 pyramids. I'm sure his workers really love him, right? Okay. All right. So there you have it. So let's get to, well, guess who's coming up next? That's right. We get to Khufu. Yes, finally. Yes, the Great Pyramid of Egypt follows next. We're there. We got there. Khufu reigned from 2589 to 2566. These are all really approximate dates. People always fight over this, but considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world by the Hellenistic era. The Great Pyramid rises to a staggering 146 meters or 481 feet. So you think to yourself, okay, that's pretty high, right? So remember, the Red Pyramid is 344 feet, and the Great Pyramid is 481 feet. Still a lot taller, but hey, Khufu made 3, so not Khufu, different. So this was, as I said, was the tallest structure in the world for, 3,800 years until we got the Leaking Cathedral in England, which is around 1300s. But the Great Pyramid required an unusual amount of round-the-clock forced labor to build it in only 20 years. Now, the pyramid is estimated to weigh about 5.9 million tons, since there is about 23 million blocks, 12 blocks weighing between 25 to 80 tons would have to be placed into the structure every hour, day and night, for 20 years straight. I'll say it again. Since there are 2.3 million blocks, 12 blocks weighing between 25 and 80 tons would have to be placed into the structure every hour, 12 blocks every hour, day and night, for 20 years. That's a lot of work. The entire pyramid is covered with a smooth white limestone blocks. But unfortunately, way later, in the 1300s, I mean, that's not too long ago, a massive earthquake loosened these blocks. So up until the 1300s, it had these beautiful blocks, that white limestone blocks that covered it. And so it shined all the way through to the middle part of the Middle Ages, almost to the High Middle Ages. Oh, wow. But the earthquake loosened it. And so as a result, Nasser ad-Din al-Hassan in 1356 decided to build various structures in Cairo, including various mosques, using the limestone blocks that were part of the exterior of this massive pyramid. In fact, let's go on. Now, I want to say something else. The pyramids in general, were not built by slave labor. I'll say it again. They were not built by slave labor. They were built by contracted workers. Slavery during the Old Kingdom wasn't that popular. That was something that happened elsewhere. That was much of the Middle East. So there was hardly any kind of form of slavery in Egypt. And most of that slavery were foreigners bringing their slaves with them. I know, you're having an aha moment. During the Middle Kingdom, also contracted workers. But during the New Kingdom, slaves built things. Why did that change? Because between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom, you had the Hyksos. And the Hyksos introduced, during the Second Intermediate Period, they introduced all these new ideas, obviously the use, of course, of bronze and chariots and slaves. So that came in. So, of course, obviously the believed Jewish captivity was during the New Kingdom, where it is believed that Jews were slaves. That's the New Kingdom. But during the Old Kingdom, no slavery, contracted workers. And now I'm going to go into detail about them. Yes, here we go. Ready? Okay. So there's tens and thousands of these workers, and we have discovered their camps. And it's like summer camp, but and these camps were unearthed near the pyramids by various archaeologists. In fact, we know how they organized their labor. So the breakdown of this labor was hierarchical, consisted of two gangs of 100,000 men each. 100,000 men each, two gangs. Each of these gangs were divided then into what are called zaz, or phylum. So 5 zaz of 20,000 men each. And then they're subdivided from there. Now, evidence that we found shows that there were around 5,000 permanent workers on regular salaries, with, of course, the balance working 3 or 4 month shifts in lieu of taxes. So they don't want to pay taxes. Be a contracted worker on the pyramids, yay, for 3 or 4 months, and you don't have to, or MERS, you don't have to work. So there you have it. Now, around 4,000 were the total workforce of the laborers who quarried the stone, and they're the ones who hauled the blocks to the pyramid. And of course, obviously, the setting of the blocks would involve others. But a lot of the workforce also involved support services, tool makers and scribes and so forth. So we have discovered a papyrus, actually various papyri written by the men who participated in the building of the Great Pyramid. And of course, this is the tomb of Khufu, right? So amongst the papyri, they found a journal that of an officer by the name of Merer. He led a crew of around 200 men, and he traveled from one end of Egypt to the other, picking up and delivering goods of one kind or another. Of course, one of the main things he did is, of course, moving stone. So Merer accounted for his time and a half day increments, talked about filling his boat with stone, and then he talked about taking that stone up the Nile River to Giza. Merer mentions that he reported to a certain noble by the name of Ankaf, who, by the way, happened to be the half-brother of the pharaoh Khufu, and of course was understood as the overseer, right? Overseer of the construction of the Great Pyramid. Somebody mentioned TurboTax. Yes, yes. So work the Great Pyramid, you don't have to pay taxes for 3 to 4 months out of the year. I think that's a great deal. What do you think? No, maybe. Well, but they also get paid something. We'll talk about that pay in a little bit. Now, since the pharaohs used the Kura limestone for the pyramid's outer casing, Merer's journal chronicles the last known year of Khufu's reign and provides a snapshot into the building of the Great Pyramid. Isn't that great? Because that's sources. Of course, we also have graffiti, but anyway, we'll talk about that later. Now, what will happen is that they found in the 1980s, they found a residential area for the pyramids, as well as Sphinx of the Giza region. So we take a look at this, and in fact, then during around 1999, they started to uncover the apartment blocks that housed as many as 20,000 people around these pyramids. In fact, the settlement was as big as a football field. Each of these structures was an ordinary building that had a pillared porch and sleeping platforms and a kitchen. Isn't that nice? So you can, 3 to 4 months out of the year, you get this little place and get your own kitchen, right? Maybe. It was unfortunately enlarged to house around 50 people sleeping side to side. Can you imagine sleeping with 50 other people? Imagine the snoring, right? So these are basically barracks, right? And looks like that the sleeping quarters were on 2 different levels, maybe different shifts. Now, many of the Giza residents, appear to have been very well fed, because we went through their trash. Kind of rude of us to do that. We went through their trash, and judging by the remains of the site, they were eating a great deal of beef. And looking at the bones, it wasn't just any beef. They left in the trash the choice cuts. So not only, sure, 50 to a barrack, I get that, but the benefits is that you don't have to pay taxes 3 to 4 months out of the year, and you can have as much beef as you want, apparently. By the way, they paid them in even more than just beef. I just want to bring that up too. So they fed them they fed them bread. They fed them radishes. We find this in the documents, by the way, and in the trash. They fed them onions, leeks, and lots of beer. Can you imagine? It's like, and garlic. Lots of garlic. I love it. It's like, you had some onion and you had some garlic. and you had some radishes, you had some beer. Hi, honey, I'm home. Ooh, ooh. You been working on the pyramids again, honey? Ooh, ooh, get out. No wonder. Can you imagine eating that kind of food and then being stuck with 50 men? Oh, man. Hopefully they had nose plugs in those days. Okay, I'm stopping. So, well, you got to think this, this is reality, right? But yeah, yeah, burgers and brew doesn't sound half bad. Somebody says veggies too. Yeah, it doesn't. Offset all the meat, but it was a lot of beef. I mean, lots of beef, and but in fact, um, uh, well, as it turns out, we take a look, and the beef cattle was mostly raised in rural estates, and they were brought up via various boats to Giza, where they were slaughtered there. Right now, what happens is that interesting because we look at the archaeology and looks at those people who raised the beef were not eating the beef; they're eating pigs. So they're eating pork. But the laborers of the pyramids are eating beef. And in fact, Lehrer, the archaeologist who I mentioned, mentions that the ratio of cattle to pig for the entire site stands at 6 to 1. So six cattle, six beef to one pork. And for certain areas, as much as 16 to 1. So, I mean, they and very well stocked and a lot of it. So basically, you guys remember thinking because they're working so hard, they need to have a lot of protein to be able to do that. There's a few other exotic things. They found hippopotamus bones there and leopards, but teeth and so forth. But for the most part, it's a lot of beef. Also, sailors were there. Sailors, yeah. And Murrer mentions these sailors, and other sources do. And it mentions that in fact, Murrer's journal also mentioned that the stone was brought up right to what is called the horizon of Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, which many interpret that means the pyramid. So wait a second, what? Yes, and we have some other evidence, actually lots of evidence, to mention that apparently, well, not apparently, because boats were buried too near it, is that the Egyptians created a canal uh, that redirected the Nile, or at least a part of it, to bring the stone right up to the pyramids of Giza, even though today it's a few miles away. So there appeared to be a major harbor that's connected to this area, this complex. Isn't that fascinating? So there you have it. Okay, so the Great Pyramid has three main inner chambers called the Grand Gallery, the King's Chamber, and the Queen's Chamber. And I have everything written down, but I think that many of you can look that up. I want to make sure that we kind of get to where I want to go. The Queen's Chamber, of course, is pretty amazing. But of course, you have the Grand Gallery as well. Some of the areas seem to be hard to access, but they've been using a micro snake camera to kind of go around and poke around and peek around those areas, the ascending passages and the descending passages. But there's places that are blocked and so forth. The King's Chamber is kind of interesting, though. The King's Chamber is there seems to be these shafts. And in fact, there are these shafts, but the reason for these shafts are not clear because they don't need to have air shafts for any reason. And so they appear to be connected to the night sky, or they seem to be aligned to stars or areas of stars of the northern and southern skies. Now, you have something called recession. You have this, so the star alignment is not exactly the same as it was, as it is today. So the stars are different, from ancient times. But it looks like that they opened up to the North Star as well as to the Orion Belt. We know, of course, the North Star and these very stable stars were known as the imperishable stars, the indestructibles, they called them. And so, in fact, there's one inscription that reads from another place. It says, I, the king, will cross to that side on which are the imperishable stars, that I may be amongst them. So the idea or the belief is that these stars connect to the idea of living ever after, continue on. And so that's the concept, that to bring the king spirit going up into the heavens. So I find that very interesting. A lot of these chambers are completely empty. The king's chamber has a sarcophagus that looks pretty unfinished. But they are, like I said, pretty empty for the most part, long devoid of what they had before. We do know about Khufu. Let's talk about Khufu, who built this pyramid. And I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you a Khufu story. Why not? I mean, you don't oftentimes hear Khufu stories. They're a little different. Than this story of Khufu, it's based from the Middle Kingdom, which is still not too far away from his time. Well, in Egyptian time, it is. And the story is narrated by his son and the next pharaoh, Djed-Fer, and it tells his father Khufu about a miracle worker in the kingdom. I'm just going to go ahead and read the story because I think it's entertaining, and I just want to tell you a story. Once upon a time is my interpretation. There's a commoner named Dedi living in Djed-Sneferu. He's a simple. I'm reading the actual piece. This is not, obviously not an Egyptian, but I'm reading the actual story. He's a simple citizen, but he is 110 years old, and he eats 500 loaves of bread, a shoulder of beef, and drinks 100 jars of beer every day. I got to tell you, that's a lot of beer. So, and a shoulder of beef is quite a bit. Maybe you should join the pyramid builders. 500 loaves of bread, that's a lot of carbs, but he's 110 years old. He is capable, it says, of resurrecting decapitated beings. He is also said to be able to make wild lions so obedient that the animals would follow him with a cord dragging on the ground, like a cat, right? Hey, let's follow the cord, right? Furthermore, this Dedi has knowledge of the number Ipset with sanctuary of Pope. Hearing his son's words, Khufu agrees that he should send for him so that he may be in his presence. So Djed-Fer finds the elderly magician and tells him, your condition is equal to someone who lives from aging and to someone who sleeps until dawn, free of illness and wheezing. I like to be free of wheezing. For aging is the time of dying, the time of the preparing of the burial, and the time of being buried. This is the question about the condition of a noble man. I have come to summon you in order of my father, testified, that you may eat from the delicacies which my father gives, the food of his followers, and then he may guide you to the ancestors. It's nice, which are in the necropolis now. Then he replies, welcome, welcome, Djed-Fer, son of the king, beloved of his father. May you be praised by your father, Khufu, the justified. May he let your place be at the front of all time honored ones. May thine Ka successfully champion all things against any enemy. May thine Ba know the ways that lead to the gateway of the mummified deceased. Now Dedi is brought before Pharaoh Khufu, who asked of him, it is true. Now, is it true, this talk about you could mend the severed head? And Dedi responds, yes, O sovereign, my lord. May you live, be blessed, and prosperous. I know how to do that. Okay. But then Khufu orders, may a prisoner who is jailed be brought to me so that his execution may be enforced. In this order, Dedi is horrified and tells Pharaoh not to make a human suffer. Oh, sovereign, my lord, may you live, be blessed and prosperous. You see, it was never allowed to do something like that on the noble flock. Instead, then, of a human prisoner, Dedi chose to have 3 animals decapitated, a goose, a waterfowl, and a bull. After each was decapitated, this is not a story to tell a child, right? After each was decapitated, he would place the head on the eastern side of the hall and the body on the western side, say a set of magical words, and both the head on one side and the body on the other side would come to life. Ooh, that's kind of weird. So the head would come to life on one side and the body on the other. After that, then he simply reunited the two, and the animals would live again. After a few more tests of the magician's power, Khufu generously rewarded him and ordering, "Have Dedi assigned to a place within the palace by my son Digitur, where he shall live from now on. His daily gainings will be 1,000 loaves of bread, 100 jars of beer, and 100 bundles of field garlic." 100 bundles of field garlic? Oh, man, that's a lot of garlic. Hopefully, it's like garlic bread and mix it together. So there you have it. I did notice that, before he ate 500 loaves of bread, so he got 500 more. So maybe it's worth becoming part of Pharaoh's household for that. Well, but you know what? I get the impression that Khufu doesn't seem to be a very nice guy. Are you getting that? You're getting, that's important. Really, for this talk? Yeah, it is. So because now we have a later account by the historian Herodotus, the Greek historian, 484 to 425, and it shows that he's not a good guy. And he's known as Ramsinitos. So he says, "As long as Ramsinitos was king, as they told me, there was nothing but orderly rule in Egypt, and the land prospered greatly. But after him, Cheops, him, became king over them and brought them to every kind of suffering. He closed all the temples. After this, he kept the priests from sacrificing and then forced all the Egyptians to work for him. Some were ordered to draw stones from the stone quarries in the Arabian mountains to the Nile, and others he forced to receive the stones." And it talks about him building the pyramids. So we have an account of the building of the pyramids as written by the Greeks later on, who are talking to the Egyptians, and through their records as well as oral tradition have recorded these ideas. And once again, is connected to building these pyramids. I'll read another little part that Herodotus says. He says, "For this, they said, 10 years were spent, and for the underground chambers, he's talking about the pyramids, on the hills upon which the pyramids stand, which he caused to be made in sepulchral chambers for himself in an island, having conducted thither a channel from the Nile." Look, we even have an account here of that channel I talked about coming from the Nile right to the pyramids. Then he talks about how the pyramids were made. He says, "For the making of the pyramid itself, there passed a period of 20 years." We think now, and the pyramid is square, each side measuring. It goes into the measurements, which are kind of off. This pyramid was made after the manner of steps, which are called rows, others called bases. When they had first made it thus, they raised the remaining stones with devices made of short pieces of timber, lifting them first from the ground to the first stage of the steps. And when the stone got up to this, it was placed upon another machine standing on the first stage. So from this, it was brought to the second, and so forth. So it talks about the machinery that's being used to make it. Herodotus mentions, because he visited Egypt, he was there. He said that on the pyramid, it is declared in Egyptian writing how much was spent on radishes and onions and leeks for the workmen. We've lost that graffiti or that inscription today. And also, if I remember correctly, what the interpreter said while reading the inscription to me, a sum of 1,600 silver talents was spent. So it talks about it. So it's common knowledge that he built this. And of course, also Diodorus from the 1st century BCE also claims that Khufu was hated by his own people as well. And it goes on forth, but also we find that the workers on the Great Pyramid incised the exact dates onto the pyramid blocks with an inscription that declared, "We did this with pride in the name of our great king, Kanu Kuf," which is the name Khufu. So we did it. So the Great Pyramid was built. There's more evidence too. I mean, graffiti, journals, traditions, archaeology, finding the workmen, right? I mean, we're going to go a little bit longer. I want to make sure we get through the section a little bit. So, how does one build a massive construction like a pyramid? One of the major problems faced by early pyramid builders was need to move huge quantities of stone. The 12th dynasty tomb of Digit Hotep has an illustration, for example, of 172 men pulling an alabaster statue of him on its ledge. Statue is estimated to weigh around 60 tons. And so it took about 45 workers to start moving this accordingly. So how was it done? So we know it's done. We have illustrations, other images too, that show that they're using strategies and techniques. I just mentioned this one in the tomb. So, well, there's one strategy, and if you know your physics, I'm going to bring it up right here. There's a method for rolling stones using what's called a cradle-like machine that has been excavated in various New Kingdom temples. So what happens is that 4 of those objects could be fitted around a block, so it could be rolled quite easily. Experiments have been done using it, and guess what? It does work for 2.5 ton blocks. The question is, how do they move the 7 and 8 ton blocks? Well, there's other possibilities as well. So, but we do know there are some strategies, right? Moving further along. Now, one other little bit I want to bring up, as the stones form the core of the pyramids, were very roughly cut, especially in the Great Pyramid. The material used to fill in the gaps, that happened to be another problem. So huge quantities of gypsum and rubble were needed. Now, the problem is the filling has no binding properties. So they had to stabilize after they poured the quantities of gypsum and rubble into these crevices. They had to be stabilized because it needs to have a stable core so it can stand. So to make the gypsum mortar, it had to be dehydrated by heating, which then required large quantities of wood. So they would stick wood in there and they would burn the wood. Wait, wood could be carbon dated. Wait a second. You mean you can date a pyramid? Yeah. But they can't date the stone, but you can date the carbon elements. Well, this seemed to be a big answer. But the problem is when they dated it, it turns out that the wood was older than the pyramid. So they looked at this. In fact, the average age of the wood was 374 years earlier than the pyramid was built. It's like, what was it? So not thousands of years, 374 years when it comes to the dating this carbon. Well, that's about 400 years. So they're thinking, it would have taken to build, to make this body agent, all that wood, it would have knocked down all their forests. And sort of, well, how do they do this? So why is this wood off? Well, guess what? Many archaeologists had an aha moment. They're all, wait a second. They're not tearing down, the pyramid's not, 400 years earlier. The wood is older. And the reason why the old wood is older is that basically this time when people are building houses and homes and buildings and so forth, they're not using stone. In many cases, they're using wood. And so what happened is apparently Pharaoh found some old buildings and villages that were to be torn down, and he tore it all down and used some of these old buildings for kindling. So forests are too much needed. This is interesting, right? So you can still date a pyramid by using these elements. Okay, so there's also good information on the quarries and how the tools they use to cut the stones in the quarries, the transportation of the stone, and of course how they did that. So workmen used copper chisels, drills, and saws to cut the softer stone, especially most of the limestone. Harder stones, like for example, we take this for granite, and it is granite, as well as basalt, cannot be cut with copper tools alone. So what happened is they pounded it down with dolerite and drilling and sawing with the aid of a pacer, such as quartz sand, and then blocks were then moved through by a sledge that were lubricated by water. And of course, uh, that's how it moves. So there's the ancients were amazing engineers. But we find the evidence of how they made it behind. Okay, so let's get through a little bit more pharaohs, and then I know there's a part you want to hear, and there's the Sphinx, right? So the pharaoh Digit-fer, who's the next guy, the son of Khufu, who reigned about 10 to 14 years around 2575 BCE, is connected with the ruined pyramid of Abu Rawash, which is positioned on a higher elevation than the three famous pyramids upon the Giza plain, making it the highest pyramid. Some scholars believe that this pyramid was actually a sun temple, but the problem is that the pyramid itself is missing. We lost the pyramid. We just have the understructure. So what happened? It was deliberately destroyed. We lost a pyramid, a whole pyramid. We didn't misplace it. It looks like the destruction started as early as the New Kingdom. So possibly he was not a very popular pharaoh. And some of that stone was then used by some the early Christians, the 400s to 500s, to build various monasteries, like the Coptic monastery, for example, of Wadi Karen, using some of those stones. And then, in fact, there still remains of it, even in the 19th century, still being hauled away with about 300 camel loads a day of stone. So they just took it away. So how they built this was interesting, because what they did, and I'll say this quickly, is they decided to build the entire tomb structure, dig it down first, build it up, and then what they did is plop the pyramid on top of it. So as opposed to, unlike the Great Pyramid, where it's part of these various ascending and descending passageways going between the various chambers, the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and one's going underground. With this one, they got a little bit more clever, and they just built everything underground, and then they plop a pyramid on top, and they block the entrances. And that's how they did it. That was easy, but unfortunately, they swept away the whole top. Oh well. Khafra comes next, who reigned between 2558 to 2532. He's credited for building the second largest pyramid of Giza, which rises about 471 feet high. This pyramid still retains many of its outer casing stones. That's what makes it interesting. In fact, it covers the top third of the structure on top. You see the outer casing stones, and I think that's pretty exciting. Now, this is Khafra. Here we go, because you want me to go here. Many Egyptologists assign the famous Sphinx to the same time as the Khafra pyramid because of its close proximity, and because many of the architectural elements of the Sphinx are similar to the surrounding complex built by Khafra, which includes, by the way, the Sphinx temple. Now, yes, the Sphinx looks differently from the pyramids. And people will say, well, see, so it must be older. Well, no, there's a difference. You see, the pyramids are built with stone that was brought from somewhere else. But the Sphinx, much of it was carved out of the living bedrock. There it is, the living bedrock. And so, of course, it's carved right out of living bedrock. It's going to look and older. It's going to be very porous, right? So there you have it. Now, of course, the makers gave it a man's head. Some say it's a woman's head. The body of a lion. It is 66 feet high and 240 feet long. It has, it looks kind of, so we take a look at this and look at the style, and people fight about, which is it connected to Khafra, or does it go back to Khufu? And this is the argument that goes back and forth, We're not going to go into the argument. Just know that there's an argument. But looking at it architecturally, it seems pretty sure, the order things that are built, that it was part of Khafra's larger building complex. So there it is, right? So now apparently there's actually fossil fingerprints on the blocks, uh, various places that may have come from the ditch surrounding the Sphinx. What I find is interesting is that some of these blocks, as they're building the Sphinx, there's a ditch around the Sphinx, and some of those stones that were connected to adding to the Sphinx were also included in the Sphinx temple structure we know is built by Khafra. So you do have contemporaneous stones on both those monuments. So again, we're back to a Khafra date for it. It's interesting because if you take a look at it, if you stand in the eastern niche during sunset, around March or the September equinoxes, right? You see a dramatic event. The sun appears to sink into the shoulder of the Sphinx, and beyond that, into the south side of the pyramid of Khafra on the horizon. And so this may have been a very symbolic moment, but you see here a little bit of alignment going on here. Equally, also the Sphinx, during the summer solstice, the sun appears to set midway between silhouette of the pyramids of Khafra and Khufu, which is also rather interesting. So the architects seem to arrange this complex, Sphinx and temple, to the sun. And of course, you have this growing cult of the sun that continues to grow. And maybe the idea is to collect this cosmic energy from the sun to energize and give life to the pharaohs. Now, there are signs that the Sphinx was unfinished. In fact, in 1978, in the corner of the statue's quarry, they found, 3 stone blocks that happened to be abandoned by the laborers who happened to be dragging them to build the Sphinx temple. We found that there. And the north edge of the ditch surrounding the Sphinx contains segments of the bedrock that are only partially quarried. So they really didn't finish it. Here, they found the remnants of the workman's lunch and a toolkit, and some beer and a water jar and stone hammer. So apparently, it's like, hey, we're done working on that. So look like the Sphinx wasn't finished yet. It's like, we're done. Okay, and the remnants of that continues. And there's another story of the Sphinx, and it's connected to Khafra. And this is from the reign of Thutmose IV, who is the son of Amenhotep. He ruled from 1401 to 1391, and it's called on the dream stealing. And we have it, and I'll just read it, part of it here. It says, and then we're going to wrap it up. So just more evidence connected to who built the Sphinx. And it says, now the statue of the very great Khafre, the great Sphinx, rested in this place, great of fame, sacred of respect, the shade of Ra resting on him. Memphis and every city on its 2 sides came to him, their arms in adoration to his face, bearing great offerings for his Ka. One of these days, he happened that Prince Thutmose came traveling at the time of midday. He rested in the shadow of this great god. So he's resting in the shadow of the Sphinx. Sleep and dream took possession of him at the moment the sun was at zenith. Notice, by the way, from this account from the New Kingdom, that the solar aspect is still very important at this time. Then he found the majesty of this noble god. So the Sphinx is going to talk, speaking from his own mouth, like a father speaks to his son, saying, look at me, observe me, my son Thutmose. I am your father, Horamak Khafre Ra Atum. I shall give to you the kingdom upon the land for the living. Behold, my condition is like one in illness. What? All my limbs are being ruined. The sand of the desert upon which I used to be now confronts me. And it is in order to cause you to do what is in my heart that I have waited. And so, in response, Tutmos says that he restored the Sphinx, and because of his actions, the gods made him Pharaoh. Oh, more sources. Okay, so you look at the Sphinx, and what happened is, what about the nose? You know, the nose, what happened to that? Well, the nose, according to Arab historian al-Busy, the nose was destroyed actually by a Sufi Muslim by the name of Saim al-Dir in the year 1378. So not Napoleon. When he discovered that peasants were making offerings to the image in their belief that it had the power to make for a better harvest. So this Sufi is going, no, we're going to stop that worship of this image. Now, you know, so they're hoping that it would increase their harvest. Now, you're going, this particular man did this. However, I want you to hear the rest of the account. Saim al-Dir was so enraged that he destroyed the nose, and so as a result, had to pay the ultimate action for his penalty for his actions. He was hanged for vandalism. Okay, so that's what he gets. Now, of course, we have another one which we won't talk too much about because I want to wrap this up and see what happened to the pyramids. So, ruling from 2532 to 2112, we have, of course, Pharaoh Merenkur, the son of Khafra, the grandson of Khufu. According to Herodotus, unlike many of his predecessors, Menekar was fair, considered a good pharaoh. And I do want to read this. This is interesting. He said, "This prince disapproved of the conduct of his father, reopened the temples because even his father was considered bad. Reopened the temple and allowed all the people who are ground down to the lowest point of misery, you know, was working on these pyramids, supposedly, to return to their occupations and to resume the practice of sacrifice. His justice in the decision of causes was beyond that of all the former kings. The Egyptians praise him in this respect more highly than any other monarchs, declaring that he not only gave his judgments with fairness, but also, when anyone is dissatisfied with the sentence, made compensation to him out of his own purse and thus pacified his anger. Yet despite his fairness, the goddess, according to Herodotus, deemed that the Egyptians were to suffer with harsh rulers for the next 100 years. An oracle reached him from the town of Buto, which said, 6 years only shalt thou live upon the earth, and in the seventh thou shalt end thy days. Well, he was upset, and so he sent an angry message to the oracle, reproaching the god with his injustice. He says, my father and uncle, he said, though they shut up the temples, took no thought of the gods, and destroyed multitudes of men, nevertheless enjoyed a long life. I, who am impious, and I am to die soon? There came a reply, a second message from the oracle. He says, for this very reason is thy life brought to quickly an end. Thou hast not done it as behooved thee. Egypt was fated to suffer affliction 150 years. The two kings who preceded thee upon the throne understood this. Thou hast not understood it. And so what did he do about it? He's now doomed, you know, because he's good. Because he made the smallest pyramid. He's kind of modest. Because he's good. He's only to reign 6 years, and Egypt is fated to have bad rulers like the ones who built the 2 biggest pyramids. I mean, come on, you know. So what does he do? He reigns 12 years. Why? What does he do? How does he reign 12 years? He says, well, what happens is this. He made, he did, supposedly, to make it 6 more years, is he had lamps prepared, which he lighted every day at evening time, and feasted and enjoyed himself unceasingly both day and night, moving about in the Mars country and the woods, and visiting all the places he heard were agreeable sojourns. He wished, so basically, he just kept it light all night around him. So that way, by turning nights into days, he could live twice the life. So he reigned 12 years. So there it is. And you have, of course, his pyramid is a lot smaller. It's only 215 feet. What happened to that pyramid? Well, the second Ayyubid, a sultan of Egypt, al-Malik, decided to tear it down. during his reign from 1171 to 1198. He started, but fortunately, it proved to be too difficult for him to do it and just left a big gash on the side, but it was just too much work. Now, the fate. After this, you're going to have another one by Shepsut, but you're going to start to see gradually, as time goes on, the pyramid becomes just an architectural aspect of a larger mortuary complex. As a result of that, the pyramids start to become smaller and smaller. In fact, soon after, for a quick period of time, they even went back to the step pyramid. What's going on? Because the mortuary temples become more interesting to them. The pyramids lose its allure. Then what happens is that we get to the Middle Kingdom. We do have pyramids during the Middle Pyramid. We do. But they hardly exist. Because what happens is this, where before during the Old Kingdom, they had a solid stone core and they fixed it. I talked about how that works and placed the limestone blocks and really solid. Well, they kept the idea of the limestone blocks, but much of the center of these Middle Kingdom pyramids were rubbish and mud. And, so as long as the limestone exterior remained, the pyramid looks pretty good. But as soon as any of the limestone blocks broke away, the weather and the rain and everything else just eroded, melted these pyramids into nothing. So you had, in a sense, a cheaply covered pyramids with a mud core, with a rubbish core. And I don't know, I could think of all these illustrations I could give about what that means symbolically, but it's definitely in decline. The pyramid shape is still considered sacred, but in many cases, even without a grand pyramid, you're going to see its symbolism will be incorporated in other ways and in smaller form in these mortuary temples. And then by the time we get to the New Kingdom, it's passé. And that ends the pyramid. So, you know what? I think you know too much now. You're dangerous. So we know a lot about the pyramids. There's a lot of details I could tell you, but I wanted to keep it at least. I have 15 more pages of materials, but I want to make sure that you can just digest it all. There's so much to go, but you can tell me now, got a reasonable doubt, how the pyramids evolved and why they evolved. So it appears to me that at first is about resurrection machines. They are about resurrecting the dead, that being the pharaohs, right? And then as time goes on, it takes on solar aspects and connected to Ra, the primordial mound, as well as the rays of the sun. That idea does continue throughout the time of the Giza pyramids, and especially after that. And it seemed to be connected to the rise of Ra as an important deity, right? But again, times change. Pyramids kind of go out of fashion. The big ones, they're labor intensive. And sometimes these pharaohs rather have this elaborate mortuary complex rather than just one big pyramid at the very end as like this enormous tombstone. And so that is the story of the pyramids. I hope I didn't ruin them for you, but they seem to be very much connected to the human condition. They're connected to, yes, the worship of the gods. They are connected to the idea of wanting to live forever, but they're also connected to the idea of power and prestige and control. Thank you very much. All right. So there you have it. So we cover a lot. Do you feel like you can tell me how a pyramid was made, right? Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't ancient aliens.
So it wasn't ancient aliens. And in fact, over and over again, the evidence shows that it's just Egyptians. I know. I feel bad, Hey, maybe Imhotep, maybe he's an alien, right?
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. Okay.
Go with that. But yeah, the interesting part, I always love Sneferu, because everybody's going, "Oh, they couldn't make a pyramid, in that short period of time. And Sneferu makes 3 of them. That's all trial and error. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Let's do it again. It doesn't give up, I tell you, nose to the grindstone. It's big nose, right? I always picture again Sneferu, or he has perpetually a cold. I don't know. But anyway, like I said, I like to make a cartoon of him, so many questions.
Well, I'm thinking about the extra manpower that it must have taken to dedicate that much workforce to something that is just a monument. They weren't, making housing or growing food or any of the other productive things. They were just making this cool thing that the pharaoh wanted.
Well, yeah, because there's nothing else to do. So here we go. Okay, so yes, if you're living in Mesopotamia, life was really tough. You had floods, you got droughts. They're busy doing irrigation. Many irrigation to bring the water to the fields. They're coming up with crop rotation and fertilizing the fields. Using sheep and all that kind of. They're thinking of all these great ideas. In Egypt, it was like this. So starting August into September, you had, of course, the Upper Nile. You have all this black, rich silk, and it washes up and goes up the Nile, or I should say, goes down the Nile. And what it does is it just covers, the water rises, the flood water rises, and it covers the Nile basin with this fresh, rich mud. And then in November, it recedes. And so the farmers just plant renewed. And so the Egyptians, even though they're busy, a lot of them are not as busy at doing farming because they have this automatic system going on for them. It's like sitting back, there goes the water, there's the fresh soil, let's plant, let's wait. Oh, that's great. And the next year, so there's a lot of extra time. There's an old saying, idle hands are tools of the devil. So yes, for about 3 to 4 months out of the year, you gotta keep these people busy. So yeah, why not? So you did have some a little extra time. Hope that makes sense. It's not like Mesopotamia where they're just struggling to survive. This is Egypt. This is why they talk about the fat of Egypt. This is why they talk about, they have stories of the Israelites. It's like, hey, let's go back to leeks and onions and melons. We want to go back because, it has all the great food. And people aren't starving. That, you take a look at those camps where they're building the pyramids. That's not starving rations. That is the best of the best. So they're eating well. So lots of benefits, taxes and lots of food. So that makes sense. So Egypt is kind of a weirdo when it comes to the rest of the ancient world. It's a strange bird because they actually love their gods too. That's what I think is interesting. The Mesopotamians are like, oh, hey, it's like, just kill us already. And their afterlife is just like, oh, I get to squeak like a bat and disappear. may I just, I just don't want to exist at all. Meanwhile, the Egyptians are kind of going, life's so good. Just gotta keep living. Let's just keep the story going there, And their lifespans are longer. Sure, they're shorter than in modern times, but it's a lot longer than it is in other places. And so they conceive this idea of living forever because they're living their life now at that time well enough to imagine that the afterlife must be also pleasant. Does that make sense? It's like, ancient Mesopotamia is like, you're living to be, 20 years old and you're going to be dropping dead soon, you know, and, but you do take your, monthly or yearly bath. So that's cool if it ever rains. The point is that Mesopotamia. Egypt, however, it's like you bathe every day, so it's kind of clean. So maybe I should, retract what I said about the 50 men all sleeping together. Hopefully they all washed, I'm sure, after the labors. But it still doesn't, excuse them from all the onion leek breath. But, is this good? Is this making sense? So there's a context there. Yeah. And, but yeah, they love their gods. They have the nice, sure, some of the gods they're scared of, but a lot of them have these beautiful attributes, like, humble one, helping the lame, helping the travelers. That's Amun Ra. It's like, wow, really? So, yeah. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah. So there was, and look at Egypt, and so they didn't need slave labor. They got off-season workers. Slave labor comes later, much later. Like I said, they didn't allow slavery. If you came into Egypt and you had a slave with you, they didn't allow that. But slave labor did not become popularized until the Semitic Hyksos arrived during the Second Intermediate Period. Which is interesting because they enslaved the native Egyptians. And then when Othnos I ran them out to start the new kingdom, they just returned the pleasure. It's like, well, you enslaved us, so we're going to enslave you. And their allies were the Habaru, these Semitic Hyksos, which are the Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So there you have it. Interesting.
Yes.
Yes. Any other questions? No.
I guess you covered it all.
Did I cover it all? Nothing at all, right? So all the questions are answered. Are you surprised? How the Hyksos connected to the Hebrews? Actually, did a whole talk on that. The Hyksos are Semitic peoples, and they come from the area of Canaan, and they move down and they attack the Egyptians, and that ends the Middle Kingdom period. And so you have this 100 years of foreign rule, where they bring with them, as I said, chariots and the use of bronze and so forth, these new technologies, and they believe also bring with them slavery. We do find that the group known as the Habaru appear mentioned in Egypt during the New Kingdom. They weren't mentioned before in Egypt during the Old Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom, but after that they're mentioned, and they are slaves. So there's association. But we also connect the Habaru as Hebrew. You can see the sounds, because we can also trace their background through the name Habaru. This is another long story. Is originally associated with the area of Mesopotamia, and it first appears around 1800 BCE, which, by the way, is around the time of Abraham. And then this term Habaru moves up to Eastern Anatolia, and then we find tons of information on the Habaru by name in the area where Israel is, and Palestine is. Isn't it fascinating? We find it there, and then all of a sudden that name is there, and then after the Hyksos, it also appears in Egypt. But unlike a biblical account, it's in both places still. So that means there are Habaru who stay behind and Habaru who are in Egypt. And then what happens is that during the time of the Sea People, during the 1200s, Habaru, they disappear from Egypt in the inscriptions, and they appear in a larger amounts in settlements with their pottery in the Delta region that we found, suddenly appearing in pits in places that I've seen at Tel Dan and other locations in Israel. So it looks like then they move back to the area of Israel and Palestine. Is this interesting? I don't know. Yeah, that's fun, right? So yeah, that's how we know. Answer the question.
Yeah, I just posted the link to the lecture on the YouTube.
Yeah, I think I talked 2
Habiru.
hours on this.
Yeah.
So I summarized that in 5 minutes that I do for 2 hours if you're interested in watching that. So yeah. Is this fun? Any other questions? Right? Yeah. Right. So no questions as okay. So now we're going to we're going to those topics. So let's see here. As far as the name Moses is what is fine. I can't help but think that some of the names, that's not Moses. Yeah, Moses to draw from, right? Moses is a typical Egyptian name. It's not a Jewish name. I mean, it's a Jewish name, but yeah, Moses. It's the same. But then again, he's part of Pharaoh's household, according to belief. See, I'm adding that according to belief. Right? He's part of Pharaoh's, so that's that connection there too. So, any questions on pyramids? I can introduce you to the pyramid schemes. Say,
I wonder if the architecture was worse during the slavery period.
Shoddy architecture.
Was it worse during the slave period? Yeah, because they didn't take as much pride in their work, or they're like, forget this, we're gonna do a shoddy job.
Well, yeah, I mean, it looks like they did, but it looks like they did an okay job on those New Kingdom buildings. So I guess the quality was up, but but maybe not done with love and care and tax-free situations. More hardship, and we know that slaves didn't eat as well either, because again, people always forget this, and I wonder why. Everybody goes number two. And everybody goes number two in different places. So it's not like we don't have what they left behind. So we know what they ate. We take a look. We know the fiber they ate. We know the foods they ate. And we know if they were good nutrition, and we know if they're bad nutrition. And we find a lot of little worms and terrible things in the intestines, and it's bad. So it's bad. But that was, during the time of the New Kingdom, and so slaves didn't eat as well, right? So we know they weren't treated very well, or not, but during the Old Kingdom, of course, they're treated well, right? They're not slaves. They got the best of the beef, So at least so, Osiris tells me, right? Right, Osiris? Right. Hiya. That's Osiris. Hi, Osiris. You see his monk there. Yeah, he's looking at you. He's looking at you, kid. And then you see Osiris. Okay, I'm moving right along. Of course, there's always Hathor. Oop, oh. All right, so moving right along. So any other questions? You're like,
okay, there is a question in the chat.
Yeah, yes. That was the question. I think I heard a theory that Tutmos was Moses before he left Egypt on the run after killing an Egyptian. So, yeah, I mean, I actually have heard that theory, but it just doesn't. The Egyptians left so much in the way of records. I know you're thinking, well, yeah, you have it on stone. Well, Egypt has this great climate that preserves a parchment. So we got records. If it was anywhere else, then yeah. But Egypt, it's a place that remembers. You write something down. Egypt has this way. I mean, we don't have a lot of records from that time. We do have some though. We have a whole bunch during the Khanate. A whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, hope that makes sense. So we do have records. It doesn't seem to work out with the timeline at all, but yeah, I've heard that too. I mean, and it's the name. If he's supposedly connected to Pharaoh's household, he would have a good Egyptian name like Thutmose. So he just shorted to Moses, right? Maybe it's his nickname. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Oh, all right. Well, I guess I'll walk like an Egyptian out of here.
I got one more.
Oh, you do?
One more. So do you think that the contract workers were conscripted, like force conscripted to do it? Or was it considered an honor, or did they want to do it because of all the good food, or did you have to do like, 8 years of 3 month service or something like that?
Well, considering the fact that they get a tax break on it, I think there's a sense of volunteerism going on there, right? And like I said, you got to imagine yourself. I mean, you're looking at what they left again behind. They are feeding these people really well. They are working hard. They are working really hard. They're feeding them very well. They're giving them any food they want. They have all the perks. But yeah, I can see maybe you're not happy about living with 50 other people.
But you said things weren't bad at home.
But things were too. But yeah. So I'm not sure if I like the room and board. But then again, a lot of people don't spend a lot of these times indoors anyway, right? So we know they were nice and clean. They washed themselves, so we know that So I don't know. I mean, they worked all day, slept all night, but they saved
Drank
money.
all night.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope that helps, right? Yeah. Ali says the star alignment of the pyramids would seem to be something that we can use for dating, using precession of equinoxes potentially. Thank you, Ali. Yes, absolutely. And they do line up if we do the precession correctly. Yeah, yeah. I had to use that for my my book on Artemis of the Ephesians too. That way, I had to calculate the recession, and the stars would line up at certain temple types and places. Where it's like, look, it doesn't line up at all. It's like, yeah, but now let's calculate. In the first century, oh, that's the same thing. People say, oh, these air events, they don't line up to our stars. It's like you have to account for that the constellations is a little different. And then it does measure up. So definitely something I would like to learn more about. Yeah. So it is definitely important to learn. Is this good? You guys learn things here? Right? So, oh, wonderful. Oh, okay. Do you believe any theories that pyramids enhance or store energy, psychic abilities, ESP, sharpened blades kept inside them, curses, etc., etc.? What I'm going to do is I'm going to have fun with this. What I mean by having fun with it is that I believe that maybe the Egyptians believe that to a certain extent. How's that? It's a safe religion scholar answer, is it not? There seems to be evidence that the Egyptians themselves believe that they possibly could store some power and some energy. And you kind of see that with the pyramid texts. So the pyramid texts sort of go there, but you also kind of see that with the alignment of other things as well. I hope that helps, right? So because it does seem to be all about energy from the sun that is connected to the configuration of these pyramids that seem to be aligned. I mean, the Great Pyramid is perfectly aligned north, south, east, and west. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and the outline does seem to fit the star alignments, although not exactly. So, but yeah, the Egyptians. You guys ever heard of the cannibal texts? I shouldn't even go here. Yeah. So the Egyptians believed that the gods can feed you themselves, so you keep on living forever. Or it comes to the pharaohs. I know I got your attention. So basically, what we see here, I actually have something on it. Is that there are these cannibal texts where the pharaoh, he will actually hunt the gods, he will lasso them, he will bind them, he will then slaughter them, and then he will eat their entrails, especially their hearts, because it contains intelligence. in order to gain their powers, to gain their energy. So this is symbolic cannibalism. Yeah. So there you have it. These are called cannibal hymns, and these are in the pyramid texts. The pyramid texts of Unas, for example. In fact, I'll read. I actually found, as I'm talking, I actually found a quote from that, because that's me. And there it goes. This is Unas says in the cannibal hymns connected to the pyramid texts: a god who lives on his fathers, who feeds on his mothers. Unas is the bowl of heaven, who rages in his heart, who lives on the being of every god, who eats their entrails when they come, their bodies full of magic from the Isle of Flame. So I think I answered your question. Probably more directly than you wanted me to. So yes, they do believe this energy from the gods feeds them and it's connected to immortality and resurrection. So yeah, these are the pyramid texts. So hieroglyphics, but also all aspects written. Yes. Any other question? Yes. Great. You read it. Yeah. So I'm reading what you're writing here. Are these are hieroglyphics? Yes, hieroglyphics. The cannibal thing I didn't know at all. So I hope that helped make sense. Yeah, so no giant magnifying lenses found near the pyramids that could have been used to melt the stones into place. No, instead we have found the kindling in the pyramids themselves as a binding agent, which I think is really cool. So which we can use to date, carbon dating. So when somebody says you can't carbon date the pyramids because they're made out of stone, it's like, well, guess what? and I told you about the almost 400 years years difference, but again I talked about how that worked. But none of this 1,000 years earlier, 2,000 years earlier, it's common knowledge that you see this, that these pharaohs, at least the big ones, made these pyramids. And they retained that all the way through the Middle Kingdom, into the New Kingdom, all the way to the Greek period of time, through oral transmission, but also through inscriptions in stone. They literally wrote down the fact that they built them. The laborers, we built this for this guy. It's like, I wonder if this was built for this pharaoh. They're leaving a note saying they built it. I don't know. Maybe. Is this again helpful? I know. I hope I didn't ruin pyramids for you guys. It's still fun. Like I said, it's not the pyramid scheme that you would think it would be, but or maybe it would be a pyramid scheme because everybody's working for they're working for each other. Okay, so think about it. Maybe the pyramid scheme is a pyramid scheme, and guess what? You don't have to pay taxes. That's part of the benefits. Oh yeah, it's like so. The next time around, have other people work for you in place then as you move up the rotation, right? Does that make sense? It's like, okay, so hey, I worked last year on the pyramids. Now I'm moving up to management, but it's your turn to work as a laborer for 3 to 4 months, and then you get to move up. So yeah, maybe it's a pyramid scheme. Okay. Any other questions? I know I'm getting silly, but I didn't sing because I don't know enough of the lyrics. Walk like an Egyptian. That's all I can say. And then that's all. So I can't do that. So are we okay?
No singing. No singing.
No singing.
No singing.
Okay.
I've got to run. Great job tonight. Thank you.
Did you have fun tonight?
Yes.
Okay, good. Glad you had fun. Glad you had fun. Now I got to run.